Namaste and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, a show about India's foreign relations, India's engagement with key partners around the world, how India and its friends are remaking the world order in a positive way. Viewers, we take up important countries and their bilateral relationships with India in this show. And this episode, we are looking at a country that's very, very critical for India's Act East and Indo-Pacific policy. This is Vietnam. Vietnam, words do not suffice to explain its importance really, because Vietnam is a critical building block of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, of Southeast Asia, important maritime power, dynamic economy, a country that has a disproportionate impact on world history, not just in the 20th century but even before that, known for its fierce sense of independence and autonomy, and of course a very important and constructive player in managing the balance of power in Asia. And to take us through this journey about India and Vietnam, I am really privileged to introduce you to Ambassador Preeti Saran. Ambassador Preeti Saran was India's ambassador to Vietnam and also Secretary East in the Ministry of External Affairs, handling the entire Indian foreign policy towards Southeast Asia and beyond. So this region has been shaped by her thinking and her implementation of policies. So really honored to have you, Ambassador.
Thank you.
Ambassador, when we talk of Vietnam, I mean, superlatives, I mean, people often say, you know, they defeated 3 superpowers in their history, recent history alone. First the colonial rule of France, then the United States, and then China. I mean, there's something special about Vietnam and it stands out, and of course economically very vibrant now, and rising up the ladder in terms of income levels, and very relatively prosperous society now. You have served as ambassador to Vietnam. Yes. Your thoughts, opening thoughts on, you know, what makes it such a great country?
You know, everything that you've said about Vietnam is just so true. And if you were to ask me my personal thoughts, I would say that yes, you mentioned the superpowers that it defeated. You know, it was really a war-torn region, and it has risen literally phoenix-like from the ashes to have emerged, you know, such a dynamic economy. I think what singles out Vietnam in terms of its achievements, one of course in recent years, over the last 4 decades, a very sagacious policies followed by the government of economic liberalization, the political will to do better, but all of that would not have been possible, I think, without the Vietnamese people. And if you ask me my thoughts about Vietnam and the Vietnamese people, I think it is their indomitable will, their courage, their determination to do well, and they're very hardworking people, which has resulted in the success of that country and brought them where they are today. And when we talk about the Vietnamese people, I would like to especially mention the women in Vietnam. You know, they came into the forefront during the war years as well, because they take on that additional responsibility. And thereafter, I think they've managed as a traditional society. The women have continued to play the traditional roles of being homemakers, but they've also come out in the workspace. You know, they have taken on commercial activities. They're everywhere. If you were to visit any city in any place in Vietnam, you would find the presence, the dynamic presence of women, particularly
in the marketplaces and
everywhere.
Yeah,
just
major
everywhere.
Contributors to the GDP. You know, participation in the workforce is very high.
Yes,
extraordinary. And even those tunnels, the ones outside Ho Chi Minh City, I've had the privilege of visiting them. Cu Chi tunnels. You see the guerrilla warfare. Women actually played a very big role in the anti-imperial struggles of Vietnam.
Yeah. So the other remarkable thing about the people of Vietnam, both men and women, is their patriotism. You know, that is something that has, of course, got them the victories in warfare, as you mentioned. But they remain quintessentially an extremely patriotic, nationalistic people. You know that they remained, it was the theatre of Cold War, and they were divided as a country. And for them to have come together and united, it is something that is remarkable. It hasn't happened in several other parts of the world which remain divided too. They've come together, and not only that, they remain united against external factors and external threats. So their patriotism, their nationalism, their love for their country, and their ability to stay united against external factors, I think is another very remarkable feature.
And the anti-hegemonic approach
Yes.
is really laudable, because I mean, they've been a beacon for liberty for so
Yes.
long against great powers who wanted
Yes.
coveted their land or their maritime resources, but they've been the quintessential underdog,
Yes.
but who survived and who fought for their core values and for their territorial integrity and sovereignty.
Yeah. And a third thing which struck me about Vietnam and the Vietnamese people is their very pragmatic approach to life. You know, they were, after all, victims of the big powers, including US and France and others, but they have managed to put it behind them and work. Today all of Southeast Asia continues to remain a theatre of great power rivalry, but they are pragmatic enough to understand what is in their national interest, and therefore they're able to work with all partners in what serves their best interests. So I would say those are the three very remarkable features about Vietnam which stood out, which I've seen firsthand.
And India, ma'am, I mean, obviously the strategic importance of India for Vietnam has just been growing, and they've clearly identified us as a major partner, and our own Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji has said that we view Vietnam from a long-term and strategic viewpoint, and clearly it's reciprocated on their side. So clearly this has been, especially the last 7-8 years, seems to be like a big transformative moment in India-Vietnam relations. Part of this commonality of being anti-hegemonic, and also the pragmatism that you spoke about. So India-Vietnam, I think we are in a sweet spot, and it seems to be going really well.
Yes, of course. From India's perspective, Vietnam is the central pillar of our Act East policy and of our Indo-Pacific policy, and we share a common interest and common concerns about our shared Indo-Pacific region, where we uphold together a rules-based international order, where we believe in freedom of navigation and aviation, where we both believe that in sovereignty and territorial integrity, and we firmly advocate that any disputes in that region should be handled peacefully, without threat or use of force. And because of these common strategic interests, apart from the fact that we have come together much more in recent years, but traditionally, historically, civilizationally, we have been very close. It's borne out by the charm monuments and Buddhism and all of that.
Yeah.
But even during our struggle for independence, we were struggling around the same period. We supported each other. During post-independence, we've supported each other in our national development within our capacities that we had, and I think that has generated a huge amount of goodwill. And I think more recent years, of course, you mentioned in the last 5 years particularly, I think the relationship has gone from strength to strength.
Strength to strength, says Ambassador Preeti Saran. We have upgraded from strategic partnership to comprehensive strategic partnership. Viewers, we'd like you to hear India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. Subrahmanyam Jaishankar, talk about the value of Vietnam and then resume the discussion. Let's hear him.
As political and security partners, India and Vietnam have converging interests in a multipolar and rebalancing world. We have been supportive of each other's objectives, whether in ASEAN-led forums or on global platforms. Our cooperation in the UN Security Council this year has been exemplary. Our shared respect for international law, including UNCLOS 1982, and a rules-based order is a strong commonality. It is this larger vision of how we wish to see the world evolve that really brings us together. We are both societies that are fiercely independent and deeply committed to maintaining our freedom of choices. These traits make us the foundation of a multipolar Asia in the coming years. India's Act East policy has been the guiding principle of our engagements with ASEAN partners, and Vietnam is no exception. The success of this policy has led us to adopt a larger Indo-Pacific approach that captures India's growing strategic interests more effectively. From the Indian perspective, Vietnam is a key partner, both in the ASEAN and the Indo-Pacific context. We already have a substantial agenda underway, whether it is in commerce, connectivity, or culture. Our political and defense cooperation has also been steadily growing. These can be further buttressed by interaction between the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific and the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative that has been proposed by India.
So viewers, India's External Affairs Minister talking about points of convergence, especially political and strategic, but also trade and commerce and culture and connectivity. Ambassador Saran, the point that Dr. Jaishankar made about India and Vietnam being the foundations of a multipolar Asia and a multipolar world, I mean, that is big, right? What he's saying is essentially when we two come together, it's of course trade and commerce and investment and mutually beneficial nitty-gritty, but also he's also laying out the big picture, which is that we both of us want a multipolar Asia, and that's a very important point, because we have a northern neighbor which does not want any other power to rise up to its level, and which wants to actually browbeat smaller countries, and clearly Vietnam is not willing to accept that. And in that context, you know, the idea that India and Vietnam together can create a multipolar Asia, we have other power centers. Japan is another major power center in the region, Korea is a power center, but definitely in the Southeast Asian context, Indonesia, Vietnam, and these are the two most capable countries, you know, with the best geography, geopolitical situation, and also sufficient economic and military strength. So your thoughts on this idea, ma'am?
Yes, no, I completely agree with you and everything that you've said. I think the Indo-Vietnam relations is a force for stability in the Indo-Pacific region, which is a multipolar region. It cannot be dominated by one entity, and it will not be allowed to be dominated by one entity. And Vietnam is a seafaring nation. It has both commercial and territorial interests. So do we. We are a seafaring nation too, very much part of the Indo-Pacific. Bilaterally with Vietnam, we have commercial interests in South China Sea. You mentioned the dispute that they have with China in South China Sea. Well, we have a fraught relationship with China too, and we deal with it as they deal with it. And we don't take sides in their territorial dispute, but we definitely support Vietnam in upholding a rules-based international order, notably UNCLOS, which determines when there are overlapping claims and how to go about it.
Ma'am, talking of resilient supply chains, Vietnam has been able to attract a lot of the Western foreign investment that has left China.
Yes.
And it's become a big success story in terms of manufacturing and FDI. And we would hope to also replicate Vietnam's success story here in India through Make in India. But there's also a lot going on. I mean, the bilateral volume of trade have almost touched $15 billion last year, and we are setting very ambitious targets and more complementarities. During your time as ambassador, I'm sure you have promoted a lot of the commercial relations also. So tell our audiences how you as a diplomat facilitate these things. I mean, Indian businesses, Vietnamese businesses, how do you make them come together, and please enlighten us.
Well, ultimately it is the business entities that must show their own will and see a commercial interest in wanting to do business with each other. I think government can merely be facilitators in providing the rules, the agreements that we sign. The India-ASEAN free trade agreement has given a major boost to our bilateral trade between India and Vietnam. We also have a sub-commission on trade, and that meets very regularly at secretary's level. I had hosted one during my time. In addition to that, we had tried to identify the number of Indian investments that had taken place in the energy sector, in agro-processing, coffee plantations, cashew, fisheries, and other areas of cooperation in agro-processing and agriculture, where our exports were growing. I'm happy to know that they have more than doubled from the time that I was there, and I think just in spite of COVID, I think we've done well. I think new areas of potential cooperation include in the pharmaceutical sector. It was there, but I think we could do better with Vietnam, both in I think pharmaceuticals as well as in agriculture and agro-processing. They have become very important exporters of textiles and garments, and there, actually we have a healthy competitive relationship. But I think there is potential for us, and again in mobile telephone manufacturing, etc., where we could also be part of resilient value supply chains, and that is where I see potential. Indian investments can become a major boost for encouraging trade between our two countries. I think currently we have about nearly to the tune of $2 billion. We are not amongst the top investors in Vietnam, but I see potential there. Again, if we were to look at the complementarities, I think we could do better. But already I think we've done well for ourselves, and the fact that apart from self-reliance, I think we are both focused as countries to technology, to innovation, to digitization. I think these are other areas which can provide us scope for future collaboration.
And interestingly, you see that a lot of Vietnamese capacity building in areas like cyber security, space, digital imagery through satellites, all those, India is committing to do those things with them. So the nuclear energy, I mean, these are all cutting edge fields where there is a clear complementarity and a mutual need. So it's good to see that we are helping to build capacities of a fairly advanced country like Vietnam itself, but where we have an advantage, they are keen to avail of them. So our capabilities are being able to replenish theirs.
There is of course a mutual need, but there's also a mutual comfort. That is very important when we talk about sensitive areas, whether it's peaceful uses of nuclear energy or defense cooperation. The fact that Vietnam chooses to seek India's support, whether it is in capacity building, whether it is in utilizing lines of credit for enhancing their defense capability, their security, the fact that India becomes a natural partner for them speaks for the understanding and the comfort that we have with each other and the trust in the relationship. I think that is a very notable feature of our bilateral relations.
Absolutely. Ambassador Preeti Saran is talking about trust, and viewers, I've got a special package for you, a message from one of the leading Vietnamese scholars of India and of South Asia. Her name is Dr. Thi Hang Nga, and she's at the Vietnam Academy of Social Sciences, the premier social science institution of the country, and she has something for us about India. Let's hear her.
Looking back Vietnam's foreign policy in the past several decades, it can be seen that now is the time India enjoys the highest position in Vietnam's foreign policy. India is not the only comprehensive strategic partner of Vietnam, but I think India enjoys the highest level of strategic trust of Vietnam. In the context of the increasingly complicated world which lack of trust, the fact that India enjoys the Vietnam's strategic trust is very significant. India is an important partner of Vietnam's foreign policy of diversification and giving priorities to big powers. Politically, India is a long-standing, loyal, reliable and traditional friend of Vietnam. This has been tested through times. Vietnam highly appreciates India as a rising power. Since independence, India has been a responsible member in protecting and preserving human values. It participates and is a founding member of many regional and global organizations, including the non-aligned movement, the United Nations, the WTO, the G20, etc. Economically, Vietnam highly appreciates India's economic growth in spite of the COVID-19 pandemic. India's new initiatives under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, such as Make in India, Digital India, Self-Reliant India, the vision to turn India to an economy of 5 trillion USD resonates with Vietnam's development strategy up to 2030 and its vision to become a developed economy by 2045, as launched at the 13th Congress of the Vietnamese Communist Party. India is strategically important to Vietnam. India-Vietnam relationship is to be placed in the context of the ever-changing geopolitical landscape of the Indo-Pacific region. Many scholars in Vietnam believe that India, as a country possessing nuclear weapons, having strong and modern military forces, being an active member of Quad and many Indo-Pacific mechanisms, India is among the few countries capable of balancing influence in the region and in the world. And I think the India-Vietnam defense relationship is also to be seen in this context. Vietnam currently has demand to modernize and strengthen its military forces, and I think Indian capacities and Vietnamese demands are the reasons for the rapid development of the defense relationship between the two countries.
Dr. Hang Nga, talking about defense cooperation and how India and Vietnam are critical to balance influence in the Indo-Pacific. That's the term she has used. And Ambassador Saran, defense is clearly a growth area,
yes.
and it can happen only between strategic partners who have a great deal of trust, as you've also said. We are talking about BrahMos anti-ship cruise missiles. We're talking about Varunastra torpedoes, anti-submarine torpedoes. There is a talk about Akash surface-to-air missiles, long-range missiles, coastal radar systems, naval intelligence, surveillance. You know, the whole gamut of needs for Vietnam's defense. Increasingly, India seems to be able to be a provider, and that's a big shift because historically Vietnam has been hesitant to deal with the US because of the baggage, although they are now made up and are now also approaching the US for some of their needs. But I think the fact that they have China to manage, and the fact that they need a reliable partner. Russia has been a common thread between India, Vietnam, all of us, but then they also are looking to diversify, and that's where I think, as Dr. Hang Nga was talking about, they have certain needs, and India is stepping forward. Perhaps in earlier eras we were more hesitant because of the fear of upsetting China, or of of that it may anger our northern neighbor, but now I think we are far more strategically clear in our mind as to what our priorities are, and unfettered we go ahead with for our friends like Vietnam. So your thoughts on this defense relationship?
So first and foremost, today we can say that India-Vietnam relations have reached a level of confidence and mutual trust, and it stands on its own. And the fact that there is comfort enough to be able to discuss sensitive technologies in defense cooperation is something that has not happened overnight. It has been over the years. We've started initially with capacity building and training programs, interoperability, high-level exchanges, a great deal of understanding, and then the lines of credit that have come in for defense equipment, including the high-speed boats that we talked about, and you've mentioned some others. And I would say, yes, that we both do take a strong long-term vision of our relationship, and I am very optimistic about our defense cooperation only being strengthened in the future.
And Ambassador, the location, the geopolitical location of Vietnam, the eastern seaboard of Vietnam, for example, you have extraordinary positional advantages. Cam Ranh Bay, Nha Trang, I mean these places where our Navy has been supportive of theirs and vice versa. I mean, if we have mutual logistics and agreements and informal arrangements for armies of both sides to jointly exercise and patrol, I think eventually the hope is that both sides will be able to stabilize. When we say stabilize, it is meant to establish a deterrence against unlawful and hegemonic pushes. So that's where Vietnam also seems to have shed some of their earlier hesitation, because they have been wary of directly confronting China because they have a huge economic relationship with them also. But now I think they're quite clear as far as especially their security interests go. They want India. They are also involved with Japan now. Japan is taking a bigger role in Southeast Asia, including with Vietnam. So they're what they call the East Sea. what the Chinese call the South China Sea. I mean, there's no way they will make a compromise on it. I mean, Vietnamese are clear that if they need to establish deterrence through partnerships with other players like India, they will do it. And I think on that front, they are, by their very character, fighters, and I think that is showing, and that's probably one of the fill-up for our growing defense relationship.
Yes, of course, we've mentioned it in our earlier discussions as well. I think Indo-Vietnam relations is really a force of stability in that region, and not just in defense cooperation. We've talked about the commercial aspects as well. I would say also in a multifaceted world, a multifaceted relationship like we have with Vietnam takes on an importance in a multipolar world, where you cannot have just one or two entities dominate that region. Also, the presence of India-Vietnam's commitment to a rules-based order provides that stability for sovereignty and territorial integrity, particularly of smaller nations, where we uphold the international systems.
Absolutely. And Ambassador, last thoughts on Vietnam within ASEAN. I mean, they were a country coordinator for India for a number of years. They have facilitated our engagement with the other ASEAN countries. Inarguably, they are our major de facto ally within ASEAN also. So, and Indonesia being the other big player there. So, our Act East policy has many pillars, but undoubtedly it rests so much on Vietnam. And your thoughts on how the process works? I mean, for the audiences, briefly, if you can tell them how Vietnam advocates for India within ASEAN. How does that process work? That way 10 member group, all of it increasingly looking towards India with a lot of positive hope, and we have a few vectors that are facilitating it, and the primary one being Vietnam.
Yes, of course, we have excellent relations with all the 10 ASEAN countries, both bilateral and in the regional context. And really, these are the 10 countries with whom we can really see that each of the relationship is issues free. But I would say that Vietnam definitely was in the forefront in the initial period when we started our dialogue partnership, our sectoral dialogue with them, and then, enhancing our cooperation to a strategic partnership. Coincidentally, Vietnam was the country coordinator some years back in 2017 when we were talking in terms of India hosting the India-ASEAN summit to commemorate 25 years of our relationship, when India hosted all the 10 leaders from ASEAN for a special summit in New Delhi in January 2018, and also hosted them as chief guests for our Republic Day. Unprecedented. We've never had 10 leaders, 10 heads of government and state for our Republic Day. And I would say that Vietnam's role as country coordinator was extremely positive in making that possible, and for such a positive outcome that came out of that special summit, which continues to give positive dividends in India-ASEAN relations, as well as in India-Vietnam bilateral relations and India's relations with other ASEAN countries.
Absolutely. So viewers, Vietnam has been a major force multiplier for India's Act East policy, and we are truly grateful to this comprehensive strategic partnership, the way it's blossoming, and it fulfills needs on both sides. So you can see how core national interests, values, all these are converging in forming this special bond between Vietnam and India. I want to thank Ambassador Preeti Saran for her time. Thank you, ma'am, for enlightening the audience. Viewers, keep thinking about India's key strategic partnerships. Vietnam definitely is a building block, but there are many more, and I'll come back to you next time with another country that matters to India. Until then, take care.